The amount of foreshadowing and subtle hints throughout the Elan series is staggering, and it's one of the reasons that I love rereading the Elan books so much. So today, we're going to go through 6 of the best foreshadowing moments throughout the series. I love these due to how clever they are, how obvious some of them seem in hindsight, and the enormous amount of time some of them took to pay off. And of course, since we're talking about foreshadowing of major events, there are going to be major spoilers for the Riyria Revelations and Legends of the First Empire series. But let's get started. This first one is near and dear to me, mainly because it's the only one in this list I actually caught on my first read. In Age of Death, when Turin learns about Trylos escaping Pyre and the Agave, he leaves the humans to go investigate, and when he returns several years later, Persephone asks him where he's been, and he replies, "Many places actually. Tyr, Carrick, Neath, and a little point of land that juts out into the Green Sea." The first 3 locations on that list make sense, as that is where Turin would have had to go to visit the Agave. It's that last section, a little piece of land that juts out into the Green Sea, that was confusing. See, back then there weren't any landmarks on the Green Sea that would have made any sense for Turin to visit. Back when the book came out, there were some theories, as maybe he was visiting the Gazelle or visiting Muriel. But even as the series finished up, we still didn't know where Turin had gone. In fact, here's a Reddit post from that year discussing this very line. Age of Death came out in 2020, shortly followed by Age of Empire. In 2021, Nolan started the new Rise and Fall series, and in 2022, Fairlane came out, introducing us to Barapathin, a location on the Green Sea. Some people did speculate perhaps that was the location, but it wasn't truly until Esarhaddon was released in 2023 that we finally learned that Barapathin was the location Turin visited, and his reason for doing so? To ask Mileva about Trylos, finally solving a mystery that had started over 4 years and 4 books earlier. For the next foreshadowing moment, we have to go all the way back to the first book ever written in Elan, The Crown Conspiracy. As we're nearing the end of the book, the main antagonist, Percy Braga, is about to meet his demise, and has some choice words for Ulrich and Arista. The Archduke pointed at the prince. "Look at the little maggot prince." He turned and pointed back at Arista. "And her too, just like their father. They aren't human." Percy would then die shortly after saying these words. This statement is interesting because it actually hints at 2 separate things. The first being why he and the Novron Church had King Amrath assassinated, which was because Esarhaddon had tricked them into thinking King Amrath was the long-lost heir of Novron, a fact that would become evident over the next 1.5 books. But if this was the only thing this was hinting at, this wouldn't be on the list. The real juicy part is when he says that Ulrich and Arista aren't human. This is hinting at one of the largest reveals of the entire series, a reveal that wouldn't become evident until the final book, Persepliquus, and that is that Novron, the first emperor of mankind, was Elven. Percy Braga was one of the only humans who knew this, and thinking Amrath was the long-lost heir, thought that Amrath and his children, Ulrich and Arista, were all part Elven themselves. For this next instance of foreshadowing, we have to break the 4th wall a bit. In most books or series, it's obvious who the main characters are, and that holds true for the series in Elan. Except for one, the Legends of the First Empire series. While that series was being released, there was discussion about who is the main character in the series. Now, one thing Sullivan often does is he starts the series with the main character. The character's name is always the first one mentioned, often in the first sentence or even being the first word. Riyria Revelation starts with Hadrian. Riyria Chronicles also starts with Hadrian. Nolan, Fairlane, and Esarhaddon all follow this rule as well. So when we look at the first book of the Legend series, Age of Myth, we can go and see that the very first word is Wraith, which confirmed many readers' suspicions at the time that Wraith was the main character, as that was a very popular idea early in the series. But as we got deeper into the series, it became clear that Wraith was not the main character. So had Sullivan just broken his own rule? The answer, of course, is no. He had just misdirected us a bit. See, every chapter in the Legend series starts with an excerpt from the Book of Bryn. So when we take that into account, the first character mentioned is Bryn. And as we got to the final book of the series, it became clear that Bryn was actually the main character of the series, as far as that series could have a main character. For number 4, this one flew way over my head the first time I read Riyria Revelations, as I am one of the people who did not see little old Nimbus being a god the entire time. But as it turns out, Sullivan actually gave us a hint at Nimbus's divine nature from the very minute that he appeared in the book. In chapter 6 of Novron Rising, Emilia is trying to comfort Empress Modena by telling her stories. She tells her the story of Kyle and the White Feather. It is about how the father of the gods, Erebus, wronged his daughter Muriel. Erebus begs his daughter for forgiveness, and Muriel tells him to go to Elan to live, not as a god, but as a man, to learn humility. Emilia then finishes the story. This really was one of Emilia's favorite stories, and she told it hoping for miraculous results. Perhaps the father of the gods would hear her and come to her aid. Emilia waited. Nothing happened. The chapter then finishes. Then we get a couple more chapters starring other characters. But in chapter 10, the very next chapter involving Emilia, it begins with Nimbus appearing. "Excuse me," a voice called. A thin man stood in the open doorway to the courtyard. He hesitated on the steps, dodging the passing workers. "May I enter?" He coughed, waving a handkerchief before his face. Emilia looked at him and shrugged. "Why not? Everyone else is." This was Turin, aka Kyle, aka Nimbus, who was the father of the gods, who was answering Emilia's call for help. Number 5 is another one that I missed on my first read, but seems so obvious in hindsight. I really need to read slower. In the second book of the Legend series, Age of Swords, Bryn and the group have just arrived in Neath and in the Agave, where they find the tablets Trylos has written. Bryn is deciphering them as writing has not technically been invented yet, and she is inventing it as she goes. After a while, she explains to the group what she has found so far. The tablets are about the person who is imprisoned here. The old one? Moya asked. Except he didn't call himself that. As far as I can tell, his name was the Three. He was killed by his own brother, I think. A dispute over a woman. Both were in love with someone who was real? Something like that. There's a whole lot about this woman that I skipped over, but while we had already been introduced to the character of Trylos, we didn't yet know that he was the author of the tablets. This was our first hint, as Bryn says the name of the author was the Three. This was Bryn making a linguistic error, as she was mistaking the tri in Trylos with three. We also get another hint in this statement, as Bryn says that they were in love with someone who was real. Again, Bryn is mistaking real with Muriel. But this one was harder to notice as we hadn't been introduced to the character Muriel yet. And for our last moment of foreshadowing, we have to go back to the very first chapter of the very first book of the Legend series. We had just met Wraith and Malcolm. The slave, Malcolm, is explaining to Wraith that he has just killed a Frey, a being Wraith believed was immortal. See? Dead. Get it? Not immortal, not a god, just a Frey. They die. There's a difference between long-lived and immortal. Immortal means you can't die, even if you want to. This was immediate foreshadowing at Malcolm's true identity. Many books later, we would learn that he is actually Turin, a god, and one of only 2 beings on Elan cursed with immortality. I love all the foreshadowing and subtle hints that we get in the books, but as is obvious, I miss a lot of them myself. So let me know what are some of your favorite hints and clues Sullivan has left hidden in the books. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Be sure to subscribe and watch my other videos to learn more about the world of Elan and Riyria. Thanks!